When the lawyer opened the envelope, their smug faces turned ghost white. I didn't flinch. I didn't smile. I didn't even lift my eyes from the cup of lukewarm tea cradled in my hands. But inside I felt something shift, like the slow cracking of frozen ground after a long, bitter winter. The conference room was too bright, sterile in that expensive way that tried to feel warm with golden sconces and polished oak, but still smelled faintly of ink and lemon cleaner. Evelyn sat to my right, her legs crossed sharply, tapping one patent leather toe like she had somewhere more important to be. Her husband, Matthew, leaned back in his chair, arms folded, eyes half-lidded with boredom. They hadn't said a single word to me when I walked in, just exchanged one of those glances. Tight-lipped, half-smiling, the kind people give when they think you're in the wrong place but are too polite to say it. I'd seen that look before. Many times. Evelyn broke the silence first. "Sorry, I think there's been a mistake. She's the housekeeper." She didn't even look at me when she said it. Just looked at Elijah, the young attorney Mr. Bennett had trusted for years. I said nothing. I didn't come here to argue. I didn't come to defend my place in a room full of people who had only ever seen me when something needed ironing, dusting, or disappearing. Elijah didn't respond to her comment. He simply cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and opened the envelope. There was a silence then, so thick you could almost hear the tension creaking in the hardwood beneath our chairs, a kind of stillness that comes before storms, or truth, or both. He began to read. I didn't absorb every word, not at first. The language was formal, threaded with legal phrases and clauses. But then, it happened. My name, Margot Ann Lewis, clear, unmistakable. The air shifted. Evelyn sat up straighter. Matthew uncrossed his arms. The tapping stopped. I could feel their eyes turn toward me, burning, confused, furious. I didn't look at them. I looked at his picture on the credenza behind Elijah's desk. A black and white portrait in a simple silver frame. Mr. Bennett, looking proud and stubborn, just as he had the day he told me, if my kids knew how to listen, they'd hear a lot more than the sound of their own voices. That was years ago, but I still heard it clearly now. Elijah paused, then continued reading the will, each word slicing through the room like slow thunder. And still, I didn't speak. I didn't move. Because this wasn't a moment for gloating. It was a moment 8 years in the making. 8 years of loyalty. Of wiping fevered brows, preparing dinner trays no one else touched, remembering birthdays no one else called for. Of being dismissed with a glance, overlooked, undervalued, yet never absent. The thing about being invisible is, eventually people stop watching you altogether. That's when they start telling on themselves. And Mr. Bennett? He'd been watching. Always. I knew the moment would come when the balance tipped. When the truth would step forward, whether they were ready or not. Elijah folded the letter gently and looked up. His eyes met mine, not with pity, but something else. Respect, maybe. Recognition. Evelyn's voice broke through the quiet. Shrill. Demanding. There's no way this is legitimate. My father-in-law wouldn't. This is manipulation. It has to be. Elijah calmly slid a second envelope across the table. This one, he said, is in Mr. Bennett's handwriting, dated and witnessed, as required. She didn't open it. Her hands were shaking. Matthew leaned over, snatched it up, ripped it open, and froze. I watched his face pale like a sheet slowly being drained of ink. I still didn't say a word. I just sat there, hands folded, tea cooling by the second, because I already knew what it said. Mr. Bennett had given it to me himself months ago, in the soft hours of a quiet afternoon, while the light filtered through the curtains and his voice had grown so gentle, I almost didn't catch it. This is for you. Just in case they forget who really stood by me. I never opened it. I never needed to. But now, maybe it was time. As Evelyn's breath quickened and Matthew stood up, fumbling for words, Elijah opened his mouth to speak again. And that's when everything truly changed. Some people fall into jobs the way others fall into love. Accidentally, gradually, and all at once. That's how it happened for me with the Bennett household. I didn't answer some formal ad. I wasn't recruited by a service. I showed up one day to deliver a casserole and never really left. It had been about a year since my husband left me. 29 years of marriage, traded for someone who called him babe and didn't mind his gray hair. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed the day he walked out holding the ring he left behind on the nightstand like it was some kind of apology. But it wasn't. It was a conclusion. Divorce at 59 hits different. It's not loud, it's not dramatic. It's a quiet kind of disappearance, from holiday invites, from dinner parties, from the rhythm of a life built around someone else's shoes by the door. I lost the house we built together. The garden I'd planted every spring with daffodils and cherry tomatoes. I even lost most of my furniture. Turns out, when a man walks away, he often leaves with more than his toothbrush. That's when I met Mr. Bennett. He was older than me by about a decade, still sharp, still stubborn, but his hands shook when he poured his coffee, and the house had grown too large for him after his wife passed. He didn't say it outright, but I could tell he missed conversation more than anything. He said yes to my casserole, then yes to help tidying the kitchen, then yes to me stopping by on Wednesdays. Within 3 months I was cooking dinners, organizing the pantry, and folding laundry he never asked me to do. Within 6, he handed me a key. "I don't like silence," he told me once as I adjusted his blanket. "You fill it well." There was no romance between us, just respect. He talked, I listened. I talked, he remembered. Over time, I stopped feeling like a housekeeper, and more like a witness to his life, his regrets, his stories, his pride in a son who called every 4th Sunday, if he remembered. Matthew lived in Chicago. Evelyn, his wife, worked in luxury real estate and always seemed mildly allergic to southern air. They visited occasionally, holidays mostly, but never stayed long. She was the kind of woman who wore high heels on hardwood floors and flinched if you offered sweet tea. I remember the first time I met her. It was Thanksgiving. I had made Mr. Bennett's favorite cranberry cornbread dressing, and she said, without tasting it, "Oh, we don't eat carbs." Then she turned to Matthew and added, "Is she always here?" I smiled politely and went back to basting the turkey. That became the rhythm. I existed in the spaces they didn't occupy, preparing things before they arrived, cleaning up after they left. Evelyn made no effort to hide her disdain. She referred to me as the help, and once, when she thought I was out of earshot, joked that I was like part of the wallpaper. But Mr. Bennett always corrected her. "Margot keeps this place running," he'd say. He started introducing me to his friends, not as his housekeeper, but as Margot, who keeps me in line. He never said more, and I never asked for more. It was a quiet bond, sealed over coffee cups and garden strolls and crossword puzzles we never quite finished. But over the last 2 years, things began to shift. His health declined slowly at first. Missed steps, forgotten dates, but then faster. He stopped coming downstairs some mornings. I began managing his medication, keeping notes for the doctors, driving him to appointments. I watched his body betray him piece by piece while his children stayed busy, managing their lives. I never complained. It felt natural to care for him, familiar even. Maybe I had always needed someone to care for after my marriage dissolved, and he, someone to trust when the walls around him began to creak. But Evelyn, she didn't like it. She started visiting more often, always unannounced, always trailing some cold gust of perfume and tension. She would walk through the house like she was taking inventory. "You've moved the reading lamp," she noted one day, her voice clipped. "He couldn't see well with it by the window," I explained gently. She didn't respond. Another time, she asked if I had a copy of the key. When I said yes, she replied, "Let's make sure that's temporary." Mr. Bennett, to his credit, never let her push me out. But the strain was there, pulsing beneath every interaction like a vein about to burst. One morning, not long before the hospital stays began, he handed me a sealed envelope with my name on it. "If anything happens," he said quietly, "this is for you." I didn't ask what was inside. I didn't need to. But I remember how his hands trembled more than usual that day, and how his voice, usually so firm, sounded like it was trying to hold back a tide. After that, Evelyn began hiring outside caregivers. For liability, she said, even though I'd been a certified nurse assistant in my 30s and knew his routines better than any chart. I was still allowed to stay, still expected to cook and clean. But suddenly I wasn't included in the medical meetings. The doctors began directing questions to Evelyn. I was invisible again, only this time with intent. The day Mr. Bennett passed, I found out not from her, not from Matthew, but from the front desk nurse at the hospital. She said gently, "I think the family stepped out to call you." But we both knew that wasn't true. At the funeral, Evelyn gave me a tight smile and gestured toward the back pew. Let's keep things simple. This is a family moment. I nodded, sat quietly, cried silently. I had mourned many things in my life, my marriage, my youth, my dignity. But that day, I mourned how easily people rewrite your worth when they think no one's watching. That night, I came home to find a letter shoved through the mail slot. No return address. It was a formal notice. Evelyn's name signed at the bottom. Please vacate the premises within 10 business days. The estate will be undergoing appraisal and listing. No call. No conversation. Just like that, I was being erased, or so they thought. They say grief brings people together, but sometimes it brings out the worst in them instead. The days after Mr. Bennett's funeral felt like walking through someone else's house, one that used to feel familiar but now hummed with quiet hostility. Evelyn moved through the rooms with the precision of a realtor staging a listing. Every time I turned around, something had been boxed, shifted, or rearranged. She didn't say much to me directly, just left notes on the counter. Please remove personal items from upstairs hallway closet. Estate appraiser arriving Wednesday. Please don't interfere. Please. As if we were still playing pretend at being civil. I tried to stay out of her way. I kept cleaning, kept cooking. Out of habit, out of mourning, out of not knowing what else to do. Matthew arrived on the third day, trailing behind Evelyn, like a man who'd forgotten how to make his own decisions. I heard them whispering behind closed doors in the den, where Mr. Bennett's favorite leather chair still sat facing the window. She's still here? He asked, as if I were an overgrown weed. She's leaving. I gave her 10 days. Evelyn's voice had the brittle edge of someone used to winning. Why so long? She was useful, but let's not pretend she's entitled to anything. They didn't know I was standing in the hallway. I didn't let them see that I heard. That afternoon, I took down the quilt I had made for Mr. Bennett 2 winters ago. It was faded now, stitched from old flannel shirts and denim scraps he'd asked me to save instead of tossing. I folded it carefully, pressing the corners flat, even as my hands shook. When I walked past Evelyn in the entryway, she looked up from her phone and said without glancing up, "Oh, could you take that pile of donations to the garage? It's getting in the way." I paused, surprised. Those are Mr. Bennett's books. He asked me to keep some of them. She looked at me like I'd just asked to borrow her lipstick. He won't be needing them now. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. The sting was sharp. Not because of the books, but because of how easy it was for her to erase him. To erase me. Later that night, I found one of the caregivers she'd hired, Amanda, a sweet girl barely out of college, sitting in the kitchen looking uncomfortable. "I just wanted you to know," Amanda said gently. "I didn't know they were planning to replace you. I thought we were working together." I smiled as best I could. "You don't have to explain, you're just doing your job." She hesitated, then added, "Evelyn said you'd overstayed your role." Overstayed. As if grief had a timer. As if love had an expiration date. I went to bed that night in the guest room, the one farthest from the master suite. It was the same room where I used to stay when Mr. A. Bennett insisted I didn't drive home late after a storm. Now it felt cold, temporary, like I was squatting in a memory. The next morning, I woke to the sound of drawers slamming. Evelyn was in the kitchen, rifling through paperwork. "Have you seen the estate folder?" she asked, tight-lipped. I pointed to the filing cabinet by the pantry. "It should be in the bottom drawer." He kept everything organized there. She didn't thank me. Instead, she snapped, "We can't find the updated trust paperwork, the one from last spring." I turned back to the sink. I remember him working on it. He asked me to witness a signature page, but I told him I wasn't comfortable with that, not being family. Evelyn's head whipped toward me. "You what?" "I didn't sign anything. I figured it wasn't my place." She stared at me, her jaw tight like I'd taken something from her. For the first time, I realized she was nervous. By Friday, the appraisers arrived, 2 men in button-downs with tape measures and notepads. Evelyn gave them a tour like she was selling a hotel. She even made up little stories. "This is an antique chair from Italy," she said, gesturing toward a wingback I knew Mr. Bennett bought from a roadside barn sale. "And this rug is hand-knotted Persian." I nearly choked. I'd ordered it from a catalog 4 years ago when the old one had worn through. The appraisers smiled politely, scribbled notes, and moved on. It wasn't the lies that hurt. It was the erasure. The way she moved through this place like it had never been loved by anyone other than her. The breaking point came on Sunday. I was setting the table for one last dinner. Something quiet. A roast chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, green beans sautéed with lemon. Mr. Bennet's favorite. It felt right to cook one final meal in this house before I left it behind. Evelyn walked in halfway through. Her heels clicked across the floor. She paused in the doorway and looked at the table. "What is this?" "Dinner," I said softly. I thought, for whom? I hesitated, for me, and for him. Just to say goodbye. She let out a small laugh. Cold, hollow. "You still think this house is yours, don't you?" I froze. She walked toward the table, ran one manicured finger along the rim of a plate. "I'm curious, Margot. Did you really think playing Florence Nightingale would earn you a piece of his estate?" My stomach tightened. "I never asked for anything," I said. "No. But you stayed. You stayed and played the part. The loyal companion. The grieving shadow. You know what that makes you?" She tilted her head. "A sentimental squatter." The words hit like a slap. I stood there barely breathing. Then she picked up the roast chicken, carried it to the trash, and dumped it in. "I'll have catering brought in tomorrow for the listing photos," she said over her shoulder. "We don't need this charity case dinner." I didn't cry. Not then. I simply walked upstairs into the room where Mr. Bennet had once tucked a wool blanket over my knees when I'd fallen asleep reading. I sat on the edge of the bed. Then I reached into the drawer, pulled out the envelope he'd given me weeks before, and stared at my name written in his delicate script. Margot Ann Lewis. I hadn't opened it. But now, I would. The envelope was heavy for its size, the paper thick, the seal still unbroken. My name, Margot Ann Lewis, written in steady, deliberate ink. I held it in my hands for a long time that night. Long enough for the sun to go down, for the quiet of the house to deepen into something colder. Evelyn and Matthew had left for dinner with the appraiser. Celebrating, I suppose. I sat on the edge of the bed where Mr. Bennet used to rest during his naps. I could still smell the faint trace of his aftershave on the quilt. And then without ceremony I slid my finger beneath the flap. Inside were two things, a folded handwritten letter and a second envelope with Elijah's law office printed in the corner. I read the letter first. It was dated 9 months ago. "Margot, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And if things have gone the way I expect, it means Evelyn has turned my house into a chessboard and pushed you off the table. I know how proud you are, how quiet your dignity is. You never asked for a thing, not once. But I saw you. Every single day I saw you. The way you carried others without asking to be carried yourself. That ends now. The other envelope contains my updated will. Elijah has the original copy. This is your copy for your own peace of mind. Read it, own it, and don't let them make you feel small ever again. With more gratitude than I ever said aloud, Walter." My chest tightened. I pressed the letter against my heart like it was something living. Then I reached for the second envelope. Inside was a copy of the will I hadn't known he'd rewritten. This wasn't just a few line items, it was a complete restructuring. And I was the center of it. The house, left to me, in appreciation of 8 years of service, companionship, and unwavering loyalty. The trust, reallocated. A portion for charity, a portion for the caregivers, and a significant portion to me. Evelyn and Matthew weren't cut out entirely. Walter wasn't cruel. But their inheritance was conditional, tied to how they had treated those who gave care and kindness without obligation. If Elijah found evidence of manipulation or neglect, he had the power to withhold the estate's disbursement. My hands trembled. I didn't know what to feel first. Relief? Validation? Fear? I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen with the envelope, the letter, and a cup of cold tea, watching the moonlight shift across the tiles. By morning, I knew what I had to do. The meeting was set for Monday. Elijah had called the family together to go over the estate, standard procedure, he said. Evelyn asked if she needed to bring anything. "Just yourselves," Elijah said. She smiled like a woman stepping into a victory parade. I arrived 10 minutes early, dressed in the only navy blazer I owned, the one I'd saved for interviews and funerals. My hair pulled back. Calm on the outside, but inside. Something else entirely. Evelyn and Matthew showed up in matching shades of entitlement. Her in cream cashmere, him in a charcoal suit too sharp for someone who hadn't visited his father more than twice in the last year. They didn't speak to me as we waited. Elijah entered right on time, carrying a manila envelope and a quiet sort of composure I hadn't noticed before. He looked at me once, just once, and gave a small nod. Then he sat down, opened the folder, and began to read. At first, it was routine. Language about debts settled, funeral costs covered. Evelyn was already leaning back, her expression bored. And then, everything changed. To Margot Ann Lewis, Elijah read, I leave full ownership of my home and the surrounding 2 acres of land, in recognition of her devotion, care, and constancy in my later years. The room dropped 10 degrees. Evelyn leaned forward. Excuse me? Elijah kept reading. Furthermore, I leave to Miss Treff Lewis the sum of $500,000 to be drawn from the Bennett Trust. Matthew made a choking sound. Evelyn's eyes went wide, then sharp. To my son Matthew and his wife Evelyn, Elijah continued, I leave a conditional bequest. If, in the review of my attorney and caregiver records, it is found that they acted with kindness, respect, and familial duty toward both myself and Miss Lewis, they shall inherit the remaining assets as outlined. If not, the trust will be redirected as per my charitable instructions. Evelyn stood up. This is absurd. This isn't the real will. Elijah remained seated, calm. It was updated last spring, witnessed, notarized, video recorded. Mr. Bennett left very specific instructions. Matthew finally spoke. You expect us to believe that she didn't coerce him? She lived here. She was in his ear every day. Elijah looked to me. Do you have the letter, Miss Lewis? I opened my bag and handed it to him. Walter's original, in his own handwriting. Elijah opened it, read it silently, then turned it so they could see the signature. Evelyn stared at it like it might catch fire. This isn't legal. Elijah gently corrected her. It is, and we have additional video testimony of your father-in-law confirming his wishes, including a statement that he was fully aware of your attempts to isolate Miss Lewis from his medical care. She turned to me, face flushed. You manipulated him. I stood slowly. My voice didn't shake. No, I cared for him. I stayed when you didn't. I held his hand through his worst nights, and I made sure he never felt alone in his last years. That wasn't manipulation, that was loyalty. Something you dressed up for but never delivered. Matthew looked at Elijah. So what happens now? Elijah closed the folder. That depends. We'll be reviewing the documents, but based on the accounts I've seen so far, your portion of the trust may be limited. Evelyn's jaw clenched. You think this is over? She hissed. I looked at her for the first time, not as someone beneath her, not as someone beneath anything, but as a woman who had survived. It already is. She stormed out. Matthew followed, wordless. And I stood there alone but no longer small, no longer erased. I looked at Elijah. What happens next? He smiled gently. Whatever you want. I picked up the envelope, pressed Walter's letter back to my chest, and walked out of the room. That night, I returned to the house. My house. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt earned. I stepped into the kitchen and turned on the light. Everything was just as they'd left it, boxes taped shut, half-labeled. I walked to the living room, sat in Walter's chair, and for the first time since he died, I let myself cry. Not just for him, but for the woman I'd been, the one who stayed silent. Who swallowed dignity like a bitter pill, who watched people walk past her like she was wallpaper. That woman was gone. And in her place was someone new. Not someone wealthy, not someone powerful, just someone seen. The days that followed weren't loud, no dramatic confrontations, no slamming of doors or legal showdowns, just silence. The kind that comes after a storm has blown through, leaving the air clean and the ground soaked, waiting to be lived on again. Elijah called me 2 days after the reading. They've decided not to contest the will, he said. There's no ground to stand on, and frankly, they know it. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Thank you, I said. You don't need to thank me, Margot. You already did the hardest part. You stayed when they didn't. You loved when they couldn't. That night, I walked the halls of the house barefoot. Each room held echoes of a life that had passed, and yet, it didn't feel like a tomb, not anymore. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon from the tea I'd made. The curtains swayed slightly from a cracked window. The old grandfather clock ticked with soft persistence. I wasn't haunted, I was held. It took Evelyn a week to return. She didn't knock, just walked in like she still owned the space. I heard her heels before I saw her, clicking on the foyer tiles, sharp and restless. I was in the sunroom, watering the plants. She stopped when she saw me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She was still dressed like a woman with power. Cashmere scarf, suede coat, gold earrings. But something in her posture had shifted. A small crack in the armor. "I came to pick up a few personal items," she said, her voice tight. I nodded. "I've boxed everything from your suite. It's in the garage." She hesitated, looked around the room. Her eyes landed on Walter's reading chair, then drifted to the framed photo on the side table, one I'd taken of him last Christmas, wrapped in a red scarf, smiling into a mug of cider. "He really gave it all to you," she said, not with rage, but confusion. "This house, that money, everything." I looked at her gently. "No, he gave me peace. The house and the money are just how he said thank you." She scoffed. "He barely even knew you before he got sick." I let out a soft breath. He knew me better than most, not because I told him things, but because I showed up, day after day, even when it was hard. Evelyn glanced away. "You always thought you were better than us." "No," I said quietly. "I just never thought kindness had to come with conditions." Her mouth twitched. Whether it was guilt or grief or just disbelief, I couldn't tell. Then, more softly, "He always liked you. It drove me crazy." I didn't respond. "I was trying to protect his legacy," she added. "This estate, the Bennett name." I finally looked at her fully. "No, you were trying to control it. Walter didn't care about legacy. He cared about being remembered the right way and about not being alone." She looked at me for a long moment, and for the first time since I'd met her, I saw something honest in her face, something raw. "I didn't know how to care for him," she whispered. "He was cold when I married Matthew, always comparing me to his wife, always distant." I nodded. "He could be hard," she swallowed. "You made it look easy." It wasn't, and that was the truth. It was never easy. Watching someone fade, holding their hand through pain, lifting their spirits when yours were dragging on the floor. But I had done it, and now I was still here. Evelyn straightened her coat. "I won't bother you again." I walked with her to the front door. She paused before stepping out. "He really trusted you," she said. "He did." And then as she turned to go, I said something I hadn't planned. "Evelyn," she looked back, "there's a community grant I'm starting with part of the trust for women in transition, widows, caregivers, women who've been through divorce or grief." She raised an eyebrow. "It's not charity," I added. "It's dignity. And if you ever find yourself needing a little space to land, you'd be welcome." Her eyes flickered. She didn't reply, just nodded once and walked away. By spring, the house felt entirely different. The furniture remained mostly the same. Walter's taste had been good, but the energy had shifted. Warmer, softer. I opened the backyard on Sundays. Women from the church came over with pies. A retired librarian named Janice brought her ukulele. We planted lavender by the fence and installed a porch swing that creaked when it caught the wind. One afternoon, I found a handwritten note in the mailbox. It was unsigned, but I recognized the slanted script. "Thank you for not humiliating me. You could have. You didn't. That matters." I folded it and placed it in the same drawer where I kept Walter's letter. There was room in my life now, for grace, for rest, for legacy. Not the kind etched in marble, but the kind that lives in gestures. On what would have been Walter's 80th birthday, I made his favorite lemon cake and invited the neighbors over. As the sun set, I sat on the front porch with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders and watched the kids play tag on the lawn. The house was alive, not because of inheritance, but because of intention. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the old house key, the one Walter gave me years ago before all the titles and signatures. It was worn, the edges smooth from years of use. I tied it to a small ribbon and hung it on the wall by the front door. Not as a token of ownership, but as a reminder that being seen, being truly seen, is the rarest kind of wealth. Spring turned to summer, and the house began to hum again. Not with tension or footsteps meant to impress, but with laughter, with life, with second chances. The garden beds overflowed with basil and wild daisies. The back porch always had someone rocking slowly, reading, sipping coffee, or simply watching the light move through the trees. And the living room, once reserved for stiff conversations and rare visits, now held Tuesday night book clubs and impromptu potlucks that stretched long into the evening. I never tried to replace Walter. That wasn't possible. But I let his spirit guide the way this place was used. He would have liked the way the kitchen stayed warm, the way people lingered after dessert just to talk, the way no one here had to pretend to be anything but tired and human and in need of kindness. That was the truth he taught me in the quietest way. People don't always need fixing. Sometimes they just need someone who stays. One morning I stood at the top of the stairs, coffee in hand, and took it all in. The worn banister beneath my palm, the soft murmur of voices downstairs, the sun casting long beams across the floor, and I realized I no longer felt like I was living in someone else's story. I was home. Elijah came by one day in late August, dropping off final documents for the foundation we'd started. The Walter Grant for Women in Transition. We were offering small scholarships, housing stipends, even just companionship for women who had spent too long carrying others without a place to land themselves. He lingered for a while on the porch, sipping sweet tea, watching a young mother from down the road chase her toddler across the lawn. "You know," he said, "I think this might be the only will reading I've ever done where the person who got the most gave the most right back." I smiled. Maybe that's how it was meant to be. He paused, then added, "You've turned his house into something bigger than legacy. You've made it alive." That night, I sat down and wrote a letter, not to Evelyn, not to Matthew, but to Walter. I didn't know what I believed about heaven or spirits or energy, but I knew what I felt. "You saw me when I felt invisible. You gave me shelter before the title ever did. And you reminded me that quiet loyalty is not weakness, it's strength waiting to bloom. I hope you can see what this place has become. You're still here, in every corner. And I carry your kindness forward, one woman, one room, one warm meal at a time." I sealed it, tucked it into the back of the old gardening book he used to keep by the window, and placed it on the shelf. Some things aren't meant to be mailed, just remembered. 1 year to the day after the will was read, I hosted a small gathering on the back lawn. Nothing fancy, just close friends, lemon bars, folding chairs under the big oak tree. At some point in the evening, Janice, the retired librarian, raised her glass and said, "To Margot, the woman who taught this town that strength doesn't have to shout." Everyone clinked glasses and smiled. I laughed, but in truth, I was holding back tears, because I had spent so long not being seen, not being heard, not being counted. And now, here I was, not just counted, but chosen. I still think about Evelyn from time to time. She never came back after that day in the foyer, but I heard from Elijah that she eventually started volunteering at a care center across town. Maybe something shifted, maybe not. But the truth is, I don't need to know. Some stories don't get tidy endings. They just stop needing our energy. I've learned that forgiveness isn't always loud either. Sometimes it's just a quiet decision to live better. For yourself, for the life ahead of you, for the people you'll meet when you open your door and let light back in. These days, I move slower, but my heart is fuller. I wake up to purpose, not pressure. I fall asleep knowing that the things I once thought were losses were just redirections toward something better. A woman once told me over coffee on the porch, "I always thought peace came from having everything figured out. But watching you, I think it comes from accepting what you've lived through and deciding to bloom anyway." I think she was right. Family isn't always who shares your name. Sometimes it's who shares your burdens. And justice doesn't always come in courtrooms or headlines. Sometimes it comes in the form of a worn house key, a handwritten letter, and the courage to stay kind when the world tries to turn you cold.